Good afternoon, everyone. It's after 3 o'clock, and you're all still here and there, whichever way we're seeing you. So thanks so much for sticking it out. And I figured that since this is nearly the end of the day, I better do slides and I better have something going on visually on them to keep everyone awake. So it's been, first of all, I just want to thank the organizers and Parsons for hosting. And this is, I don't know about all of you, but this is my first symposia event in person since COVID. So it's so great to be back with people in the seats, but also to realize that we can still have that greater engagement with folks who weren't able to be here in New York. So today I'm going to be thinking about and talking about the pedagogy of access, like who should be a graphic designer and how do they get there. And so I just want to sort of situate us immediately by saying, in this case, we're talking about ditching portfolios for admissions to a BFA in graphic design at a private university, St. John's University, which had probably a 50+ year history of using portfolios as one of the primary criteria for admissions to our BFA programs. And so, like all experiments, good experiments, I think we start with questions. And I want to note and just sort of situate us, and this is a very practical approach. I love theory and talking about theory, but this is not this presentation. This presentation is very much asking who should be a graphic designer, and sort of questioning how do we perpetuate systems of privilege using these sort of antiquated structures around gatekeeping. And I think that these ideas have resonated more in the last 5, say 10 years than certainly previously in my career. And in this very specific situation, St. John's University, large liberal arts university over in Queens, so not that far away as the crow flies, but pretty far away if you take the F train. And so we have a big university, small program. And, you know, we started to think about, is the portfolio actually a good indicator for student success? And then that kind of comes out, you sort of have to follow the natural progression there and say, okay, is it even a good, is it a predictor of who will end up going and being successful as a graphic designer after they graduate? And is our application process really any good at predicting who will succeed in graphic design? And like the spoiler alert is the answer was no, at least for us. So ideas don't happen in a vacuum, and I want to acknowledge some of the folks that were thinking about these things and some of the people who influenced my thinking. And so Liz DeLuna here in this room, my colleague for many years, Brian James, former colleague, you know, these were all ideas that we had been talking and thinking about for a number of years. If you have not listened to Malcolm Gladwell's Powerball Revolution episode of his podcast, and you have some time on your subway ride home or whatever, I highly recommend it. It makes you question everything we think about in terms of our ability as people to predict success, and the fact that we really think we're really much better at it than we are. Like another kind of spoiler, like if the NEH can't do it, then I'm thinking we might not be able to do it either. And then Kelly Walters, who I've known for a number of years, she's been instrumental sort of helping me with my own work and thinking about inclusion and different ways of having conversations through conversation. And that thinking has kind of rubbed up against a lot of what we were talking about with student access. In 2014, 15, 16, something like that, I was trying to figure out the dates. I couldn't remember, it seems 1,000 years ago. We had several cohorts of Brazilian students, and I'm thinking you probably had them at Parsons, and they were all over New York running around through a program funded by the Brazilian government that was then very summarily cut short. I think at St. John's, we got the Brazilian students who desperately wanted to be in New York, but couldn't get into Parsons or SVA, realistically. And that was because the portfolios they came with were from sort of a tastemaker's evaluation, truly terrible. And yet those are some of the best students I've ever worked with in a couple decades of teaching. And so those, like seeing those portfolios and then seeing who those students became a year later really started to get me to think, whoa, what's happening here? And in that case, one of the things was that in Brazil, many of the design programs some of these students were coming from were situated within schools of engineering, and it was just design was thought of in a very graphic design was thought of in a very different way. And then I have 15 years of working, plus years, of working with St. John's students. And I'm deeply indebted not just to the students who come into our program, but those who stay in touch, and we continue to talk about our programs too. Jennifer Weisenfeld is out of Duke. She's an art historian doing graphic design history, who has a book coming out from Duke University Press in the next couple of years. And I've been able to read large sections of it ahead of time. And it's the Fine Art of Persuasion is the short title, but she's looking at ideas around modernism and cross-pollination of ideas from Europe and the US to Japan in the interwar years, incredibly meticulously researched, and started me thinking around how different ideas move around and how we start to assume things and all these kind of things. Anyway, I just want to acknowledge that that's where a lot of this comes from. In response to the prompt, thanks to the internet, Slide Room and 1,500 plus portfolios I checked yesterday. I helped implement the platform Slide Room at St. John's, which was a platform for students to upload portfolios. I think used at most of the universities and colleges. Because of that, I literally myself have looked at 1,500 plus portfolios and helped sort of dole them out. And that gave us data that we just wouldn't have had access to 20 years. So again, thanks to the internet. And then finally, if I do want to just sort of point to something theoretical, the idea of backcasting. So that idea that we're imagining the future we want to see, and we're coming back and figuring out all the points we need to get there. And so, if we're thinking about who deserves to be, who is going to be graphic designers in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, and how that might look a little bit different from who goes into these programs today, what do we need to do to get to that future reality? So it's a visual presentation, we're visual people. So I just wanted to say that I've pulled some high school portfolios and then some upper level projects. I kind of tried to keep it apples to apples, which is why some of the upper level projects will look somewhat similar. But just to situate you, because some of you may be teaching in very different places, like kind of typical high school portfolio that we might have seen, we might have been expecting, and then an upper level design project, just little bits of it. And I'm going to go through these really fast. As time went on, Liz and I and Brian, my colleagues, we started to sort of wonder about some of these things and started to think, well, maybe we'll just, pretty much take whoever has a portfolio and demonstrates interest. So we were, this didn't happen in a moment. We were sort of lowering our portfolio expectations as we were seeing people coming from other majors, the Brazilian students, people coming from without portfolios, creating the same level of work by the time they got to be seniors or juniors. And I think one of the things it makes you realize, and this is one of the things that, look, the end of the story is after 4 years, you couldn't really tell the difference. We couldn't predict from the high school portfolio who would be the A student, who would be the C minus student, like what the high school for us, high school portfolios that for us seemed to predict more was how good the high school teacher was, how good the high school the student went to was at preparing students, not necessarily the raw talent or whatever of the student. So us ditching the portfolios completely, which has happened, it's a thing, go to our website, happened in a couple phases. So first we started just like the soft rollout was, we're going to accept applicants regardless of their portfolios. And we're able to do that because we control in the department that part of the admissions process. So we're sort of able to do that under the radar. Then at the same time as we were thinking about a lot of these things in the department, admissions actually came to us and said, look, we've done some analysis and we think you're missing a bunch of students who would be graphic design students, but who, because of the portfolio, never made it into the program. Like, is this something we can talk about? And I think they were really surprised to get a very warm reception. And yes, actually, we'd love to talk about this. So we tested the policy with admissions, and we actually used COVID to do the test, or used the fact that we were hearing from high school teachers and high school students saying they weren't getting the same help as normal. And so we said, we're going to put a hiatus, like, because of COVID, you don't have to do it for a couple of years. And then that language went away, and we made it, since then we made it permanent. So we've had a 2-year trial, and these are initial outcomes, and it's not totally scientific, but we do have some really like, there has been some dramatic differences. We have 50% growth in our freshman classes since we did this. And that's here nor there. We're not always looking to get more people at a school like St. John's. Of course, the upper administration is thrilled. So the people who sit in those offices that are much nicer than ours are very happy about that. But I think there's a couple of things that are just striking. There are more young men in our programs. And St. John's when we say, diversity, St. John's is truly diverse. There's no one group of students in terms of backgrounds, racially, economically. It's very diverse. But what it has meant because of who comes to St. John's is it's more young men of color. And there's almost gender parity now. So our freshman classes used to look 65 to 70% female to male, maybe some years going up even a little further. And now we're at like 45, 55. I think one of the classes is at like 48, 50, 52, something like that. So that is a stark difference in terms of just who's sitting in the classroom and whose work we're looking at and the kind of conversations that we're having. I want to acknowledge that we don't know if these numbers mean that these students would never have become graphic designers, right? They could have gone to another school. There's not a real way to tell that, at least from what we have yet. But students who come, in just asking students and observing students who come to design from interests other than fine arts is who we're capturing here. They come from anime, they come from making music and doing album covers or like little covers for their Spotify, like Kelly showed earlier. They come from yearbook or doing newspaper. And they tend to think about graphic design way later in their high school careers. Okay. This has not come without challenges. We're a large liberal arts institution, so having pathways for students who end up not wanting to do graphic design might be easier at a school like ours. There's 80 some other majors to choose from. Getting buy-in among faculty was not an issue within graphic design, but certainly it continues to be a challenge outside of graphic design. Bringing a full year of graphic design classes into the freshman year helps level the playing field for us, meaning students are taking graphic design 1 and 2 at the same time as they're taking their foundations courses. And that is just pretty essential, I think, because we do have students who come from these programs with these high schools with amazing art programs. And so we got to get everybody able to kind of be at the same level by sophomore year. So this is like a little report card. And I just want to note that our next problem that we're still working on is scholarships. And we're in the beginning of this one, but students who we award merit-based scholarships to are overwhelmingly from the most privileged backgrounds of our students' population. And so at a school that was founded around social justice issues and educating children of immigrants 150 plus years ago, for many of us who feel connection to that original mission, this is troubling, right? And what we've seen is that these students tend to have gone to early college programs, and I have an or in here, but realistically, there probably should be and receive supplementary arts education. And so with our scholarships, by using the portfolio as the metric there, we are, and different schools can decide how they want to award scholarships. But at St. John's, what we've realized is that we're awarding scholarships to students in the most privileged backgrounds. And that's not something that many of us in the faculty are all that comfortable with. So we're thinking about what to do about that, getting our toes wet. And so something I think about a lot is sort of analyzing my own experience and my own privilege and seeing what helped me get to where I am and thinking about, can I gift that to someone else rather than perpetuate systems of privilege? And that looks different at different institutions and for different people, but that's a lot of how I conceive of like who should be at the table, and is that seat in a design classroom already predicated on a level of privilege that takes out or cuts out a lot of people who, frankly, I think just should, they have the interest, should be designers. Like the field will be, the work that is produced in the field will be more interesting if more people from different backgrounds are able to work in the field. Implementation obviously looks different at every institution, and I put something on LinkedIn about this a couple of days ago, and I've gotten a ton of messages back from people who are like, yeah, we haven't required portfolios for a decade. And I have a couple students saying, hey, I'm so glad like to hear this. I came in, we have a lot of refugees from like biology and other majors that parents make their kids do, and then 2 years in, they finally relent. So, you know, students from those backgrounds, a couple of them got in touch and said, yeah, like if, you know, I never could have done graphic design if I'd had to show a portfolio. And so, you know, as we've been hearing about today, some of these problems around who gets to be a graphic designer, how do they get into different programs, are ongoing. It's a conversation we need to continue to have. So if the problem is chronic, if it's ongoing, so must the solution be as well. And we're going to make some mistakes along the way. I think it doesn't mean it's not worth doing. And coming from a program where we were doing something for 50 years in one way, if we can take some data and make some changes, I think that that's really exciting. So I love to chat about this stuff. Thank you all. And yeah, looking forward to the next presentation.